I still remember how calm her voice was when she said it. That was the part that stayed with me more than the words themselves. Not anger. Not sadness. Not even hesitation. Just this cold, settled calm. Like she was changing the Wi-Fi password and expected me to nod and move on. My name is Trevor. I'm 37, and until that night, I would have told you my marriage was going through a rough patch. Nothing dramatic. Nothing unusual. Just stress, distance, a few dry months, the kind of thing people always say happens when life gets heavy. I believe that because the alternative was harder to say out loud. The alternative was that my wife had already checked out of us and was waiting for me to accept it quietly. Her name was Melissa. We'd been married for 9 years, together for almost 12. No kids. Just a 3-bedroom house outside Charlotte, a golden lab named Murphy, and enough routines to make us look stable from the outside. I worked as a project estimator for a commercial roofing company. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid well, and I was good at it. Numbers, timelines, bids, risk. I built my life around paying attention to details and planning ahead. Melissa worked in HR for a healthcare company, which meant she spent her days talking about communication, empathy, and employee well-being, then came home and treated me like a problem she was tired of managing. It hadn't always been that way. For the first few years, we were good. Really good. Easy with each other. She used to meet me at the door sometimes, wrap her arms around my neck before I even had my boots off. We'd stay up too late on weeknights talking about nothing, then regret it in the morning and laugh anyway. There was warmth in the house back then. Not just in bed. Everywhere. In the kitchen while making coffee. On the couch during dumb shows neither of us even liked that much. In the way she used to look at me when I was halfway through telling a story and already knew she was about to laugh before I got to the end. Then somewhere along the way, warmth became efficiency. She still did things. Still answered questions. Still remembered groceries and bills and birthdays. But it started feeling like I lived with a competent stranger. The kind one-word answers came first. Then the sighs. Then the way she'd lean away ever so slightly if I touched her while she was on her phone, like my hand was an interruption instead of affection. At first I told myself it was work. Her company had gone through leadership changes, and she came home drained a lot. More meetings. More office politics. More late calls from people who apparently couldn't solve anything without her. I tried to be supportive. I picked up more around the house. I cooked more often. Took Murphy to the vet myself. Let little things slide. I figured marriage had seasons, and being a good husband meant not making every cold week feel like a crisis, but cold weeks turned into cold months. Our bedroom changed before I was willing to admit it had. That's how this stuff happens, I think. Not in one big scene. In quiet little shifts you explain away until you realize the whole landscape moved while you were busy being patient. She started going to bed later than me, saying she wasn't tired yet. When she did come to bed, she brought her phone with her and kept scrolling long after I'd turned off my lamp. If I rolled toward her, she'd say she had a headache. If I kissed her shoulder, she'd pat my hand absent-mindedly and say maybe tomorrow. Tomorrow became next week. Next week became not lately. Then even bringing it up started making me feel pathetic. Still, I tried. One Friday I made reservations at a steakhouse she liked, the one downtown with the low lighting and the overpriced cocktails. I picked her up a small bouquet on the way home, nothing dramatic, just enough to say I was thinking about her. She thanked me, got dressed, came with me, and spent half the dinner checking her phone under the table. I asked if everything was okay. She said work was just annoying right now. I tried to steer the night somewhere softer, somewhere that felt like us, but every conversation slid right off her. Back home, when I reached for her in bed, she gave this tired little laugh and said I was reading the room wrong. That one stayed with me. Reading the room wrong. Like wanting closeness with my own wife was some social mistake. Another time I planned a weekend at a lake cabin about 90 minutes away. Nothing fancy. Just quiet, no interruptions, a place with a fire pit and a decent view. I thought maybe getting out of the house would help. Maybe we needed a reset. For the first few hours, it almost felt possible. She was relaxed enough to smile, we grilled burgers, Murphy ran around like he'd just discovered freedom. That night we sat outside under blankets with wine and the kind of silence that should have felt peaceful. I put my arm around her and she stiffened instantly. Then she said she really just wanted to sit without expectations for once. Without expectations. That phrase did damage too. Because what she meant by expectations was me. My touch. My hope. My belief that married people should still act married. The night she finally said it out loud was a Tuesday. Completely ordinary on the surface. I'd gotten home around 6:30, changed clothes, took Murphy out, reheated leftovers. She came in later than usual, dropped her bag by the kitchen island, and went straight to the shower without much more than a hello. By the time we were both in bed, the room already had that tense, quiet feeling I'd come to hate. She was propped against the headboard, phone in hand, screen glow on her face. I lay there for a minute staring at the ceiling, telling myself not to start another conversation that would end with me feeling smaller than when I began. Then I turned and asked if we could talk. She sighed before I even finished the sentence. I said I missed us. I said something felt off for a long time and I didn't know how to fix something she wouldn't even acknowledge. I kept my voice calm. No blame. No accusations. Just honesty, as clean as I could make it. She looked at me for a second, then set her phone face down on the nightstand and said she needed to be clear about something. I thought maybe this was the moment she'd finally tell me what was going on. Stress. Depression. Resentment. Anything real. Something we could at least put a name to. Instead she said she didn't want intimacy anymore. Just like that. I remember blinking at her, honestly not sure I'd heard right. I asked what she meant, and she said she meant exactly that. She wasn't interested in that part of marriage anymore and didn't think she should have to keep revisiting it just because I was unhappy. She said people changed. Needs changed. Priorities changed. I needed to stop acting like physical closeness was some requirement she owed me. Owed me. I sat up then, not angry yet, just stunned. I told her I wasn't talking about being owed anything. I was talking about connection. About our marriage. About the fact that you can't just declare one entire part of a relationship dead and expect the other person to salute and move on. She crossed her arms and said that was exactly the kind of pressure she was tired of. Pressure. Every word I used got twisted into something ugly in her mouth. Need became pressure. Hurt became selfishness. Marriage became management. I asked if this was temporary, if something else was going on, if she even wanted to work on us at all. She said she didn't want a long emotional discussion at 11 o'clock on a work night. Then she turned off her lamp, rolled onto her side, and said I needed to respect her decision. Her decision. I lay there in the dark listening to my own breathing and realizing, maybe for the first time, that she hadn't opened a conversation. She had delivered a policy. Over the next few weeks, I did what any stupid hopeful husband does when he still can't accept that the ground under him is gone. I tried harder, just in quieter ways. I brought home her favorite takeout. Fixed the back gate she'd mentioned sticking. Asked if she wanted to walk Murphy with me in the evenings. Suggested counseling once, very gently. She acted irritated every single time, like any effort from me came with some hidden agenda. If I complimented her, she looked suspicious. If I touched her arm in passing, she pulled away slightly. If I tried to talk about anything real, her face got that same shut-down expression that made me feel like I was knocking on a locked door from inside my own house. So eventually, I stopped. Not because I stopped caring. Because I was tired of handing my dignity to somebody who treated it like junk mail. I stopped reaching for her in bed. Stopped asking if she'd be home for dinner. Stopped trying to turn cold evenings into decent ones. I got quieter. More observant. If she wanted distance, I decided to give it to her so completely that all I had left to do was watch. And once I stopped trying to save the marriage by force of habit, I started noticing things I should have noticed sooner. Like how she smiled at her phone more than she smiled at me. Like how often she took it into the bathroom, even for a 2-minute trip. Like how her mood could shift in seconds after one message, warming up for the screen and cooling right back down the moment she looked at me. The truth didn't hit all at once. It started surfacing in tiny, ugly pieces. And the first one showed up on a Thursday night, when Melissa walked past me in the hallway with her phone pressed to her chest and ended a call so fast she nearly dropped it. The way Melissa ended that call told me more than the call itself. She had been walking from the laundry room toward the bedroom when I came out of my office, and the second she saw me in the hallway, her whole body changed. Not dramatic. Just fast. The phone that had been resting easy against her ear got pulled down. Her thumb hit the screen. Her shoulders tightened. Then she gave me this quick annoyed look, like I was the one who had created an awkward moment just by existing in my own house. I asked who it was. She said work. Too quick. Too flat. At 9:30 on a Thursday. I just nodded and stepped aside. That was the new part. A month earlier I probably would have asked another question, tried to sound casual, then hated myself when she answered with that tired, irritated tone she used whenever I got too close to the edges of her private life. But I was done volunteering for humiliation. So I let her walk past me. And because I let it go, I saw more. She took the phone into the bedroom, shut the door halfway, and stayed in there for another 10 minutes. When she came back out, she was different. Lighter. Not happy exactly, but softened in a way I hadn't seen around me in months. She went into the kitchen, poured herself sparkling water, and actually hummed under her breath while Murphy circled her feet hoping for attention. She hadn't hummed in this house in a long time. That night I lay awake next to her and replayed the hallway moment over and over. The speed. The tone. The way her expression shifted once she thought she was alone again. One odd call doesn't prove anything, and I knew that. I wasn't looking for a cheap excuse to call my wife a cheater. What got under my skin was the pattern. That call fit too neatly into everything else I had already been swallowing. The no intimacy declaration. The irritation at every attempt to reconnect. The secrecy with the phone. The emotional coldness that somehow never applied to whatever was living on that screen. The next morning, she was up early. Not unusual on its own. Melissa had always been organized. But there was more care in her routine than usual. Better blouse. Better makeup. Hair done before coffee instead of after. I stood in the kitchen with Murphy's leash in my hand and watched her move around like she was preparing for something she wanted to matter. When I asked if she had a big meeting, she said no, just a normal Friday. Normal Friday. She wore perfume to work. That stayed with me all day. I kept telling myself there were reasonable explanations. Maybe she was trying to feel better about herself. Maybe the distance between us had made her pour more energy into other parts of life. Maybe this had nothing to do with another person at all. But once your instincts wake up, they stop being polite. They keep collecting. That evening, she was late. Again, not unusual enough to stand on its own. But when I texted to ask if she wanted me to hold dinner, she didn't answer for almost an hour. Then she replied with a short message saying she got pulled into drinks with people from HR and had already eaten appetizers, so I shouldn't wait up. Shouldn't wait up. I looked at that message longer than I should have. Not because of the words. Because of how cleanly it dismissed me. No apology. No warmth. No interest in whether I'd made anything or wanted company. Just another small closed door. When she got home, it was a little after 10. She smelled like wine and some sharper cologne that definitely wasn't mine. She brushed past me in the living room and dropped her purse by the chair without really looking at me. I asked if the drinks were fun. She said they were fine. Then she headed upstairs. Murphy followed her halfway, then came back and sat beside me on the couch. I reached down and scratched behind his ears, staring at the staircase, feeling that old humiliating mix of anger and restraint. Because part of me wanted to march upstairs and empty her purse onto the bed and ask what exactly I was supposed to respect now. But the louder part of me said no. Not yet. Watch longer. So I did. Over the next week, I started noticing how tightly she managed access. If I walked into a room and she was texting, the screen tilted away before she even fully registered doing it. If her phone buzzed while we were eating, she'd check the notification face down in her lap. Once, she left it on the counter while she took Murphy out, and I saw her realize it halfway to the door. She turned around so quickly it would have been funny if it hadn't felt so ugly. She grabbed it, gave me a look I couldn't quite name, then slipped it into her sweatshirt pocket and kept walking. Another thing changed too. She got nicer in these brief, confusing flashes. Not affectionate. Not open. Just polished. Easier. A better tone after certain messages. More patient with little things. It was like whatever she was getting from outside the house left her with enough emotional surplus to stop snapping at me every second. And somehow that made it worse. I wasn't seeing our marriage improve. I was watching it get subsidized by something that had nothing to do with me. Then came the Tuesday dinner. I got home and found her already dressed, leaning over the bathroom counter putting on earrings. Not the everyday small ones. The longer silver pair she usually wore when we went somewhere decent. I asked if she had plans I forgot about. She said one of the women from work was going through a rough time and a few of them were grabbing drinks. A few of them. She said it while checking her phone. I asked where. She named a place downtown I knew required reservations and wasn't exactly where coworkers went to half care about each other's stress over cheap appetizers. Still, I just nodded. She looked up then, maybe expecting resistance, maybe ready for it. But all I said was okay, have fun. For the first time in months, I didn't chase clarity. Didn't try to make myself part of the evening. And that seemed to throw her off more than suspicion would have. She paused, studied my face for a second, then left without another word. I waited 20 minutes and called the restaurant. I didn't know what I expected. Maybe nothing. Maybe I just needed one concrete edge to hold onto after weeks of fog. When the hostess answered, I asked if they were still taking reservations under Melissa's company name for a work group. She said they weren't hosting any corporate bookings that night. That wasn't proof. So I drove there. I parked across the street where the patio light spilled onto the sidewalk and sat in my truck with the engine off, feeling equal parts ridiculous and wide awake. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. People came and went. Couples. Small groups. A birthday table near the front window. And then I saw Melissa. She wasn't with a group. She was with one man. Mid-40s maybe. Tall. Clean cut. Dress shirt, no tie, the kind of guy who probably made being agreeable look expensive. They stood outside the entrance for a second before going in, and she was angled toward him in a way I hadn't seen from her in so long that it actually made my chest hurt. Not because they were touching. Because she looked engaged. Warm. Present. Like none of the exhaustion and annoyance she brought home to me had followed her there. I stayed where I was. I told myself I needed more. Needed context. Needed to see whether this was truly what it looked like or just a cruel coincidence waiting to ruin me. But deep down, I already knew the bigger truth. My wife had not stopped having intimacy to become empty. She had just stopped giving it to me, and the hardest part was realizing the ultimatum she delivered in our bed wasn't the end of desire at all. It was a redirection. When Melissa finally came out of the restaurant 2 hours later, she was laughing at something he said. Then he touched the small of her back as they walked toward the corner. And this time, she didn't pull away. I didn't follow them that night. That was the first decision I made that surprised even me. I could have. I was sitting right there with the keys in the ignition, the street half empty, the distance between us small enough to close in seconds. I could have trailed them around the corner, watched where they went next, maybe gotten the kind of proof that leaves no room for explanation. But something in me locked up. Not from fear exactly. From the sickening realization that I had already seen enough to change everything and still somehow wanted one last excuse not to believe it. So I stayed in the truck and watched them disappear. Then I drove home with both hands tied on the wheel and the radio off, every red light feeling personal. That night Melissa came in around 10:15, kicked off her heels in the mudroom, and walked through the house carrying the same warm afterglow she'd had outside that restaurant. It was faint, but it was there. A looseness in her face. A softness around the mouth. The kind of emotional residue that should have belonged to a husband waiting at home and didn't. She found me in the kitchen rinsing out Murphy's water bowl. Asked if I was still up. Still up. Like I had no shape beyond waiting. I said yeah. She opened the fridge, took out a bottle of water, and actually smiled a little while unscrewing the cap. Not at me. Just generally. At the night. At herself. At whatever had been said to her over drinks by a man whose hand had rested on the small of her back like that space was already his. I looked at her and asked how her friend from work was doing. She didn't blink. Didn't hesitate. She said rough, but better after talking. That lie slid out so cleanly it made my skin crawl. I went upstairs a few minutes later and stood in the bathroom brushing my teeth beside a woman who had just lied to my face with the same calm, tidy certainty she'd used when she told me intimacy was over and my job was to accept it. I watched her reflection in the mirror as she removed her earrings and set them in the dish by the sink. My mind kept replaying the restaurant entrance, the angle of her body toward him, the laugh, the touch she didn't reject. When we got into bed, she rolled away from me like always. But this time I didn't stare at the ceiling wishing things were different. I stared at her back and started thinking like a man who needed facts. The next morning, I became careful. Not louder. Not colder. Careful. Melissa had gotten used to me carrying the emotional burden of our marriage on my face. She knew what it looked like when I was hurt, hopeful, frustrated, confused. She knew how to shut me down because I always approached pain like something that could still be worked through if I stayed calm enough and loving enough. So I stopped showing her where I was. I made coffee. Took Murphy out. Asked whether she wanted me to pick up groceries after work. Ordinary voice. Ordinary face. She seemed almost relieved. Maybe she thought the old version of me was settling back in. Maybe she thought the dinner downtown had happened in a blind spot she'd continue living inside. She left for work at 8:15. The second her car pulled out, I went upstairs. I wasn't proud of what came next. I still am not. But pride starts to feel expensive when your reality has been quietly tampered with for months. Melissa's closet was neat in the way people become neat when the inner life gets messy. Blouses grouped by color. Shoes aligned. Jewelry tray arranged too carefully. I wasn't looking for lingerie tags or hotel keys or anything dramatic. I was looking for cracks. Evidence of a life she had started keeping parallel to mine. In the pocket of the blazer she'd worn to the restaurant, I found a folded valet stub from a parking garage downtown. Stamped 6:42 p.m. The restaurant didn't use valet. My pulse picked up immediately. That meant one of two things. Either she had stopped somewhere else first, or she'd parked at a different location and walked. I stood in the closet holding that little square of paper like it might suddenly explain itself if I looked hard enough. Address printed across the bottom. 3 blocks east of the restaurant. Closer to the nicer hotels. Closer to the bars people go to when they're extending an evening they don't want to end. I put it back exactly where I'd found it. Then I checked the laundry hamper. Again, not proud. Her blouse from the night before still carried that trace of cologne beneath the perfume and wine. Warmer up close. Masculine. Expensive. Not proof, maybe, but enough to make my stomach twist again. For the rest of that day, I could barely focus. Every estimate at work took twice as long. I kept opening the same spreadsheet and forgetting what I was supposed to look for. Around noon I finally did something I'd been resisting because it felt like crossing a line I wouldn't be able to uncross. I checked our phone bill. Not content. Just numbers. Timestamps. Durations. And there it was. One number repeating over and over the last 6 weeks. Short calls during lunch hours. Longer ones after 8 at night. A cluster of late-night calls on the exact evenings she'd been most distant with me. My eyes locked on the pattern before my mind even caught up. It wasn't random. It wasn't work logistics. It was rhythm. Intimacy has a rhythm even when you can't hear the words. I copied the number into my notes and stared at it for the next 10 minutes. Then I searched it. No name came up at first. Just a business listing for a consulting office in the same medical complex where Melissa's company leased part of a floor. I searched again using the office address. Multiple names. One of them matched the man I'd seen outside the restaurant, Aaron Whitmore. I sat back in my chair and went completely still. Aaron. Mid-40s. External compliance consultant according to the company site. Clean bio. Clean headshot. The kind of professional role that would explain why Melissa could mention him at home without ever really mentioning him. Not a coworker exactly. Not a boss. Not someone whose name would trigger instant alarm unless you already knew where to look. And the thing that hit me hardest wasn't the name. It was the timeline. 6 weeks. Maybe longer. 6 weeks of calls, dinners, redirected warmth, and a no intimacy policy in my own bed framed as some mature boundary I was supposed to respect. She hadn't withdrawn from desire. She had reallocated it and expected me to adapt to the deficit like a good husband who didn't ask too many questions. That evening, I didn't go home right away. I drove past her office and parked across the street with my sunglasses still on even though the sun was already dropping. I felt ridiculous. Old. Like a man acting out a role he'd always judged from a distance. But the alternative was going home and sitting in the same half-lit kitchen pretending the walls weren't shifting. Employees started coming out in small groups around 5:30. Melissa emerged at 5:47 with 2 women from HR I'd seen once at the company holiday party. They talked for a minute on the sidewalk. One headed toward the garage. The other walked toward the train stop. Melissa stayed. Just stood there checking her phone. 30 seconds later, a dark gray Audi pulled up to the curb. Aaron. He leaned over, pushed the passenger door open from inside, and Melissa got in without hesitation. No looking around. No uncertainty. No performative pause. Like this had happened before. Like she'd already practiced becoming someone who entered another man's car smoothly enough not to leave fingerprints on her conscience. I waited 5 seconds, then pulled out after them. My heart was pounding so hard it felt detached from the rest of me. They stayed on trying for a few blocks, then turned toward an area of boutique hotels and newer apartment buildings near the edge of uptown. Not crowded. Not empty. The kind of place where nice dinners turn into private endings. I kept enough distance not to be obvious. They pulled into the garage from the valet stub. Not the restaurant. Not a bar. The garage. I watched Melissa step out of his car under the concrete glow of the entrance lights, smooth her hair, and look up at him with a smile so intimate and familiar I nearly lost my grip on the wheel. He said something I couldn't hear. She laughed softly, then they walked toward the elevator lobby side by side. No hesitation. No gap. No version of that was innocent. I stayed parked across the street for almost 20 minutes after they vanished inside. Part of me still wanted to storm in. Another part wanted to drive home, pack a bag, and disappear before she could come back and make me feel crazy for what I'd seen with my own eyes. But what I felt most, sitting there alone under the dim city light, was grief with the mask ripped off. Not because I had lost certainty. Because I had found it. And once certainty enters a marriage like that, it doesn't knock. It takes the whole front door off its hinges. I didn't confront Melissa that night. I drove home, parked in the garage, and sat there with the engine off until the ticking metal settled into silence. My hands were still locked around the wheel, and I kept seeing the same image over and over. Her stepping out of his car like she belonged there. Smoothing her hair. Looking up at him with that soft, private smile. Then walking toward the elevator lobby without even the smallest hesitation. That was the part I couldn't get past. Not the possibility of a bad decision. The absence of doubt. When she finally came home, it was close to 11:30. I heard the garage door, then her heels crossing the mudroom tile, then the brief pause people do when they sense the house is awake and they don't know why yet. I was in the kitchen with one light on over the sink, sitting at the table with a glass of water I hadn't touched. Murphy was asleep near my feet. The whole house felt too still. Melissa walked in carrying her purse and gave me a small surprised look, like I was the unusual thing in the room. She asked why I was still up. I told her I was waiting. That changed her face. Not guilt right away. More like alertness. Her shoulders tightened. She set her purse on the counter more carefully than necessary and asked what that meant. I stood up slowly and looked at her. Then I said his name. Aaron. The silence after that felt physical. She didn't ask who I meant. She didn't laugh. She didn't tell me I was imagining things or being paranoid or making a scene out of nothing. She just stood there in the kitchen in the same blouse she'd worn to dinner, and for the first time in a long time, Melissa looked like somebody who had run out of prepared language. I told her I had seen her. Downtown. In his car. At the garage. Going inside with him. Each detail landed separately. I did that on purpose. Not to be cruel. Because I wanted her to understand there was no way out through vagueness this time. No room to shrink reality into something harmless and manageable. She sat down without being asked. That scared me more than if she'd stayed standing. Because it meant the lie had reached the end of itself. At first she tried to talk around it. Said Aaron was someone she'd gotten close to through work. Said he understood things about her that I stopped trying to understand a long time ago. Said the marriage had already been broken before any of this happened, like chronology could excuse betrayal if she arranged it carefully enough. She kept speaking in these clean, emotionally organized sentences, and all I could think was that she'd probably rehearsed some version of this in her head long before tonight. I asked one question. I asked if she had slept with him. Her eyes filled right then, but the tears came too late to mean anything useful. She said yes. Not once. More than once. She said it had started about a month earlier, which I knew was a lie the second she said it. Not because I had proof of a longer timeline, but because people always shorten the truth when they're standing inside the consequences of it. I didn't argue. I just kept looking at her until she finally admitted it had been going on closer to 2 months. Emotional before that. Texting before that. Lunches and drinks and calls dressed up as work before that. And all at once, the whole thing snapped into place. The ultimatum in our bed. Her coldness. The irritation every time I tried to reconnect. The sudden need for privacy. The better clothes for regular workdays. The way she treated intimacy with me like a burden while clearly giving her warmth, her curiosity, her softness, her actual self to somebody else. I asked her why. She said because with him she didn't feel pressured. That word again. Pressure. I almost laughed when she said it, but there was nothing funny left in me. Just this cold, exhausted clarity. Because what she'd done was take her own dishonesty and rewrite it into a flaw in me. My desire for closeness had become pressure. My attempts to talk had become management. My confusion had become a problem she had to escape. It was the neatest trick in the world. Hurt somebody, then make them feel guilty for noticing. She started crying harder then. Said she never meant for it to get this far. Said she felt disconnected from me for a long time and didn't know how to fix it. Said Aaron made her feel seen again. Made her feel alive. Made her feel like herself instead of somebody moving through routines she hated. And that was the reveal that really got me. Not the sex. Not the hotel. Not even the name. It was hearing my wife describe another man as the place where she still felt alive while I had been standing in the same house trying to revive a marriage she was already feeding to someone else in small pieces. I asked if that was what the no intimacy speech had really been. Not a change. Not some permanent shift in who she was. Just a way to shut me out while she redirected everything to him. She didn't answer. She just cried and looked down at the table. Which was answer enough. I told her I wasn't sleeping beside her that night. She asked if we could please not make a permanent decision while emotions were high. She asked if we could talk in the morning. She asked if maybe there was still a way to be honest now that everything was out. That part nearly broke something in me. Now that everything was out. As if honesty was a stage of the affair she had finally decided we could graduate to. I told her there was nothing brave about telling the truth after I'd already had to chase it down parking garages and hotel elevators in my own head. I told her honesty that arrives cornered isn't honesty. It's surrender. Then I asked her to pack a bag. She looked at me for a long second, maybe expecting me to soften, maybe still trying to measure whether I was serious. But I think she saw it in my face. The grief was there, sure, but something else had replaced the confusion. Finality. Not rage. Not revenge. Just the end of pretending we were arguing about boundaries when the truth was much uglier and much simpler. She went upstairs. I heard drawers opening, closet doors sliding, hangers moving. Murphy woke up and came over, resting his head against my leg. I stood there in the kitchen with my hand on his neck and listened to my marriage become luggage. When Melissa came back down, she had an overnight bag in one hand and her phone in the other. That detail stuck with me too. Even then, even in that moment, she was still carrying the thing she'd chosen over the life we built. She said she was sorry. Said she knew that didn't fix anything. Said she never wanted to hurt me like this. I believed she was sorry in the shallow way people are sorry once their actions are forced into daylight. But the deeper truth was this: she had been hurting me for months. She just preferred it when I did it quietly. After she left, I walked through the house turning off lights one room at a time. Kitchen. Hallway. Living room. Bedroom. The motions felt bizarrely normal. That's what betrayal does. It tears your life in half, and your hands still remember where the switches are. I slept in the guest room, if you can call it sleep. In the weeks after, things moved fast. I talked to a lawyer. We separated finances. She stayed with a friend at first, then somewhere else after that. Aaron, it turned out, wasn't some grand answer to her unhappiness. He was just another man who looked bigger in the dark than he did in real life. Once secrecy turned into consequence, whatever fantasy they'd built started shrinking under the weight of ordinary choices. I heard enough later to know that. I didn't need the rest. What mattered was the part I finally understood for myself. Melissa's ultimatum had never been about no intimacy. It was about control. She wanted to redefine the marriage on terms that protected her betrayal and punished my needs at the same time. She wanted me to accept starvation while she ate somewhere else and call it maturity. Looking back, the affair didn't start the night she first slept with Aaron. It started the moment she decided my hurt was less important than her convenience. That is how a marriage really dies. Not always in one explosion. Sometimes in one person going cold, the other one trying too hard, and the truth surfacing only after love gets tired of begging to be let back in.